Today, I blocked Gemara. Today's Daf Chav Gimel. This is the first day Yom Tif. So the last thing we learned was this Kanim Bedorim, where they sluggish scream from top of the roof, so he can't understand what they're saying. But basically, the Kanim and the Bedorim come up with this chiddush and say that when we say in our Mishnah that a kohen is tamei ruins the carbon, that's only talking about a kohen who's tamei from tamei sheretz, tumas sheretz. But if a kohen is tamei from tumas mace, then if he b'di'evet shech the carbon, the tzitz is miratza, accepts it, and it's acceptable. And basically he goes through the logic that so a kohen can do a kohen tamei mace can bring a carbon b'di'evet. It's only a kohen or tamei sheretz. And it's lucky to find that. It doesn't make sense, but let's see. The Gemara is going to ask a question on it. So we're up to the Gemara of Chav Gimel Amar Aleph, and it begins about 12 lines on top of the page. Mesav, I'll ask you a question. It says, because we say there's two karbonos, a nazir and by a korban pesach. It says there that the tzitz is miratze al tumas dam. Now, that if the animal itself or the blood, let's say, became tamei, the tzitz is forgives for it, and you continue going ahead and bringing the carbon. So, be'ein hatzitz meratz al tumas aguf, but the tzitz does not atone if somebody is tamei. Now, pashta pshat is we're talking about the people who brought the carbon. If they were tamei, the tzitz will not be meratza on them. But there's a possibility also to learn. We're talking about the kohen who is makrivit. So b'mai, you tell me the tzitz will not atone for the carbon. So b'mai, what are we talking about here? Ilema betumas sheretz. Are we talking about? Let's say the people are tamei sheretz. We learned before that there's a kanim and Durham hold that a person who is tamei sheretz, since that night he can eat from the carbon, he can send his carbon to the kohen. He doesn't have to be present in the Beis Hamikdash. He can send his kohen to the kohen. The kohen will shecht it, and that night he'll eat it. So what you don't even need the tzitz to be meratza. So what do you mean it won't work? The people who bring in the carbon are tamei, the tamei sheretz, which is only a day. We learned before sheichtim is tamei sheretz. You can shecht and sprinkle blood tamei sheretz. Novas, elotumas mes. We're talking about over here that the people are tamei mes. Uktani, and it says, ein hatzitz meratza. It says here by tumas mes that the tzitz will not atone, which means that if the people are bringing the carbon of tamei mes, you cannot bring the carbon. But yesterday we learned that this Kenyan bedorim, their whole svara is grounded on the fact that even tumas mes, b'di'evet, they can say, even though we say we push you off to Pesach Sheni, but nevertheless, if they decided to bring the carbon, the tumas mes is all right, and that's how come they were able to make this whole kal v'chomer. So that means that tumas mace was not much stricter than tumas sheretz, because you can send your carbon. It's just clearly here that that's not meratza, that it doesn't work. Alma nitmu bailim b'mes emish carbon the same. That the bailim, if the Eden who owned the carbon became tamei mace, they cannot send their carbonos in to be brought up. So the whole basis for the Ziknei Dorim, because remember the problem was that Hakan Tumas Sheretz, which is far more lenient than Tumas Mace, and yet if the coin is tamei mace, he's all right. It's only tamei sheretz the problem. So he said, no, it's not that far more lenient, because tumas mace also they can send the karbonos in if it's a 7th day, just like tumas sheretz. So here we see clearly that you can't. It says the tzitz will not atone for it. Says you know how the Ziknei Dorim will learn here. We're not talking about the owners. We're talking about the kohen. We're talking about the kohen himself. And when it says over here that the tzitz will not be meratz, that means we will not accept the carbon, we're talking about tumas sheretz. Exactly what the Ziknei Dorim learned. They learn we're not talking about the people who brought the carbon. We're talking about the kohen who's being makravit, and we're talking about tumas sheretz. That's how they learn. So we're like, no, eat m'bailim b'mes hachanam. You're right. If the bailim became tamei mes, they can send the carbon in. Hachamais, we're talking about you should eat m'kohen b'sheretz. Talking about the kohen. We're talking about the kohen himself, who's tamei, and what kind of tumah is it sheretz, and therefore we disregard what he did. He ruins the carbon. Says the Gemara, have a problem with that. So, Amos say, look at the end of the Bryce. There's a concept called a tumas atahim, which is halacha l'moshe Messina. Interesting concept that only when it comes to a carbon nazir and only when it comes to a carbon pesach, we say that if it's you did not know that there was a dead body there. In fact, the Gemara in Pesachim there says that no one in the whole world knew, that not a person in the world, not present here, but anywhere in the world, no one knew. So it's a tumas atahim under the ground. No one had a clue. The din is that And you found out afterwards that there was something there after you brought the carbon. So the din is that it's Torah. Halacha Moshe Sinai. Now, aim a safe. Let's look at the end. So you're telling me it's talking about the kohen. We're talking about the kohen with tumas sheretz. We know that tumas at the time only applies to tumas mace. There's a dead body that no one knows that was buried over there. And you're telling me that this, we're not even talking about a mace. We're talking about a kohen who became tummy from a sheretz. So what are you talking about mace with time? If this person, we're talking about the kohen, nitma tumas hatayim, but if this person's tumah was merely tumas hatayim, atzitz maratza. The tzitz will atone for it because we're lenient. And yet, that this law of tumas hatayim is which tumah we're referring to? Only two tumas hameis. And you said we're talking about tumas sheretz. So l'chayda, what you're trying to exclude, l'mutim ma'isa, only tumas, and not what? L'chayda, my love, l'mutim tumas hatem the sheretz. By a sheretz, you had no idea there was a sheretz here, and no one in the world knew. And then you became, and then you found out you were. It's still a problem. It's not a tumas. It's not a tumas hatayim. Tumas hatayim is limited l'chayda only to mace. So how can I be prat here? We're talking about the kohen who became tummy sheretz. So you might no. He's not coming to exclude tumas sheretz. By sheretz also, if it's a suffix a time that no one in the world had any idea, only found out afterwards, it would be Torah as well. And this was everything here makes sense. So what does he mean? He's coming to exclude tumas hatayim deziva. Remember, we learned before that a tumah of a sheretz or a mace are extraneous to you. And tumah ziva comes from within you. And a tumah ziva, any tumah or leprosy comes within you, is far stricter than a tumah mace. So when we say that tumah hatayim doesn't work, where does it work? A tumah that flows from within yourself. So you want to ask a question? The boy has the question. What about a koyin hamadatza? He comes up with a new question. Too, and the way he understood, this over here, we're talking about the owner of the animal, if the tzitzis maratz or not. What about he asked? What about the kohen? That means it wasn't talking about a kohen till now. So Rabbi Chava says, what about a kohen hamaratze b'karban? Is saying hutul tumas hatoyim aloi. What do we do if the kohen didn't know that he became tamei? Would it work or not? The way we just learned pshat here, who we're talking about? The way you just learned pshat here, we're actually talking about a kohen. We're talking about the kohen. That's how you learn pshat here, and it says here in the very same mission that about tumas hatayim, it'd be mutter. So what's Ramacham's question? Someone says, you're right. Ramacham holds like this Lakish. That what? He holds, we're talking about the owners, and he holds that the owner cannot send in, if he's Tommy Messi, cannot send the carbon in. He completely argues with Cain and Shivadarim. We're not talking about the Kohen, because a Kohen, Tommy, I don't care if he's Tommy Sheretz, I don't care if it's Tommy Mace, the carbon is possible. And so therefore, when it says Tzitz Maratza, we're talking about the people themselves who are bringing the carbon. Not talking about the kohen at all. That's why I asked, what would it then be if it be the kohen who's tamei or tumas hatoyim? How would we treat that? How would we treat that? and therefore, Rabbi Chama holds that a person cannot send his carbon pesach on his own in. Why can't you send it in? Because Achil is ma'akiv. Remember, we yesterday, there's Kanish of Darn Hall that even the Tommy Mace can send in his carbon, not only the seventh day, even on the fourth day. You won't be able to eat carbon Pesach. He says, mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to eat, but if you can't, you can't. Not like the Rabbi Acham and others who learn, I don't know, Achil is ma'akiv, because we had this hekesh between the people who are nominated and the people who are able to eat. So anyway, okay, Toshma coming here. Now we're going to ask a question on Rami Bachama, which is really also a question of Shlakish, because it seems Shlakish agrees. It says in the pasuk, the Nosa Aaron, that Aaron should carry is Avoin HaKochim, by wearing the tzitz, he tolerates and he forgives, he atones the Avedas of Kochim. The Chayda, which Avedas, which Aveda is he talking about over here? We're talking about a carbon. That's possible, the tzitz manasa. Which kind of tumah are we talking about over here that this sin that Aaron carries? Im oven pigel, if we're talking about the sin of pigel, that when you brought shech to the carbon, you had in mind the wrong date. It already says, lo yerotze, it already says, lo yerotze. Rashi said that our Girsa in the Gemara is wrong, and it's the Girsa way I'm just telling you right now, which is fascinating because usually our Gemara will quote the Gemara like Rashi's Girsa, but Rashi says that our Girsa is completely wrong. There's no basis for it; it doesn't make sense. Anyway, so Rashi says if Pigel had a it says Lo Yerotze. It says there that if it's nice Lo Yerotze, the Eibush doesn't accept it because it's all wrong. And Eve other nicer, so therefore how can Aaron sit atone for that. You can't eat from this carbon. You have kares. And even oven noiser. And if it's the oven of noiser, so sorry, oven pigel is. Rashi says normally pigel means you have in mind the wrong date. Over here, pigel means you had in mind the wrong place. You had in mind the wrong place. It's lo yirotze. If it's oven nicer, it doesn't mean literally nicer, because Rashi says if let's say you left parts of the carbon beyond the prescribed time, well, but whatever you ate before, of course you did the right thing, and the carbon you were eating, just did an aveda leaving nicer. So even oven nicer means pigel. You had in mind the wrong date. Then the din is you're not allowed to eat the animal or the whole animal is possible. Hadikvanem says lo yachashiv. That's it. The Eibush won't count it. So the tzitz doesn't do anything for it. So what does it mean when the Aaron HaKohen's tzitz atones for tumah? Which tumah? You know what kind of tumah it is? The only tumah that the tzitz is benatza is that kind of tumah, which that if the entire community or the majority of the community will be tamei, then it would be permitted. And what's that? Tumas hameis. Tumas hameis is permitted. Tumas sheretz is not permitted. And why not? Because tumas sheretz, you don't have to rely on anything, because you can send your carbon in, according to most opinions, and you be marking the carbon. You leave it that night. It's only tumas mess that you can't send your carbon in. So we have no choice. So we have to. If it's a tzibur, we're going to allow you to do it today. And therefore, if it's a yachid, the tzitz will be meratz. My tumah. Which tumah are we talking about? It can't be talking about tumah sheretz, because where do you find that tumah sheretz, if the community is tumah sheretz, we permit it? No, we don't. Because you don't have to. We don't have to permit anything if you don't have to, because you can send your kabbanis in and eat it that night. Elu tumas meis. So obviously we're talking about tumas meis. The lav, and what are we talking about over here? Kigoyim, for example, shenitmu b'bailim b'meis. We're talking about over here that the owners of the animal became tamei meis. And what do we see from here? The owners of the animal, alma nit b'bailim meis, mishalchid kabbanis sein. Says clearly from here that what? That the owner of the animal that sits atones for them. You Rabbi Bachama, like Rish Lakish learned that what? That if you're tamei meis, you cannot send your carbon in at all, not just lemitzah achila makevet. By Korban Pesach, if you don't eat it, you're not yoitz at all, because you can't send your carbon in. Here, clearly it says that the only thing that Aaron HaKohen is atoned for is for tamei meis. And v'mai, what are we talking about? Ibn Nazir, that is Nazir Korban Pesach. If we're talking about Nazir, if he's tamei meis, there's no Naziris. First, you got to finish your tumah, bring the kabbanas for your first Nazir that was canceled, and start all over again. So you can't be talking about that. You got to wait till it comes clean. It's clear for me that what? That the Aaron HaKohen atones for the bailim of the tamei. It means even though it's not a tzibur, just an individual, send your carbon in. We're talking about sheretz. We're talking about sheretz. How could it be talking about and tumah sheretz? That's what the tzitz is meratza. If it's tumah sheretz, where's the tumah hutra b'tzibur by sheretz? You tell me it's the same tumah ba'olam. Not this particular tumah was permitted b'tzibur, but tumah generally, sometime by tumah's meis. Doesn't matter; it's a different tumah altogether. But the concept of tumah sometimes are suspended if it's a community. So there's a leniency in the whole overall picture of tumah. So when it comes to tumah's mestaka, when there's no leniency allowed, but tumah sheretz, which is much weaker, the tzitz is meratza. The tzitz you can send the carbon in. But not tumas meis. That's what Rambam Chama will defend himself. The and others want to bring a raya to Rambam Chama, and the dayik umaisi they bring from the pasuk itself. It says in the pasuk that the tzitz should be on the head of Aaron, and he should atone for the kochi. It says in the pasuk avoin hakochim, the oven of the carbon themselves. In oven magdish lay. Sounds like what does he tolerate? Only the oven of the carbon itself, but not the oven of the people. If the people are tamei, it doesn't help. Now, what tumah are we talking about? You can't talk about tumah sheretz because it says the reason why the tzitz is meratza because if the whole community is tamei, it's permitted. It can't be tumah sheretz because no such thing as the community is tamei sheretz permitted. Why shouldn't it be permitted? Send your carbon and eat it that night. Must be talking about tumah's meis. It says, and yet what does it say? It's clearly oven kachim in oven magdish light that it's the carbon itself. Let's say the blood became tamei, the tzitz will atone for it. But if the people became tamei, it won't. So we see clearly that ayitron b'chama. Pasha and Ziknei Dorim. So the answer will be around like I said before. La'olam Tumah Sheretz. So where's the leniency of Tumah Hutra B'tzibur? And Tumah Sheretz, Taki, if the Kohen, if Tumah, we're not going to allow it at all. The shame Tumah Ba'olam, we're talking about Tumah Sheretz, but the concept of Tumah is lenient. Then the Mishnah said Yosef sitting, you're not allowed to sit. and do you avoid them? And how do you know that? Omar Nachman says Nachman, if a kohen sits, it's no good to passel the whole avodah. Omar, because the pasuk la moed l'shor, you have to stand up and serve. La mida b'chad l'yeshiva, you stand and that's it. Before we already asked, how come you need a pasuk lam l'shor is when we know we have a rule ein yeshiva b'beis hamikdash. But some say that's only with the Rabbanon. You shouldn't sit in the base of Mikdash. But anyway, so Torah we learned, mitzvah, it's a mitzvah to stand and serve. It says those who are standing, it repeats it a second time. The reason to tell you, but if you didn't stand, the whole avodah is possible. So a kohen sits is just like Yisrael. No, if you don't behave like a kohen or Yisrael, what's the din if Yisrael does these avodas? He's chai misa. So the kohen who's sitting should be chai misa. Why don't we say that? Umachil avodah, and he ruins avodah. So why do we also say mazor b'misa? If Yisrael gets misa, af yeshed b'misa. Somebody sitting also should get misa. Alama Tanya, why did we learn a braisa? But an odel, somebody who didn't circumcise himself, or an oinen, somebody who's after departed, or yeshiv, somebody sitting, ain't on the misa bazhara. All they did is naveda. There's no misa there. L'chayda, if he treated like a zar, he's not a proper kohen. He should get misa as well. Says, you know why? Because we have a rule. You have two psukim telling you halacha, which one of them is redundant to tell you it's limited to these dinim. Since by mechusa begadim, a kohen is not wearing enough clothes, which is like Yisrael. It says in misa, you get chay misa. Ushaloi rachat yadayim reglayim. If you didn't wash and you have your hands and feet. Also, it says chay misa. So why repeat them both? And even though both of them are like Azor, Shnei Ksuma Boinke Echad, they are two psukim teaching you the same idea, that even though you're not literally Azor, but just like Azor, you're also Chai Misa. Once you have two psukim, that's it. It's limited to those two psukim, and that's why if you're sitting in the ground, you're not Chai Misa. Or an Oinen, or an Adel, you're not Chai Misa. Saying about Olamandam and Malamdi and Rabbi Yehuda holds that two psukim, you can still learn the Torah sometimes repeats itself. Do you yain also by drinking wine, which again you're like a zor, and the Torah says it's a third pasuk. Three times already, everybody agrees. Havelek shlishu shleisha ledivahakel emalamdim. Three pasukim everyone learns. You cannot learn from this. It's limited to that, and that's why a kohen who's sitting, even though he didn't have avera and he ruined the carbon, he's not chayiv misa. We'll stop over here and we'll continue.